I'm going to talk for about 5 minutes, and then we're going to pass over to Martin, just really introducing briefly what this is, why are we here. So today we're going to hear from Martin Adams. He's someone I came to know through doing this work that I really look up to and admire. Take a lot of did a lot of personal time and effort to dig into what's wrong with the world and distill it. His book Land is extraordinary. Those of you who may have heard of land value tax before, or Henry George, to me this book is like the modern version of Progress and Poverty that is in a modern contemporary language that I think everyone can understand, especially Gen Z. And I'm really honored to have Martin here and create this audience to hear from him. So a bit about these calls. You are on a Commonwealth Canada community call. This is where for every 4 to 6 weeks, we'll be bringing in guest speakers, examining different aspects of what we call Commonwealth. This call specifically is going to be focused on Martin and his views on land. But I'll just talk for a couple of minutes after this, introducing Commonwealth itself. But if you want to do a more fulsome introduction to Commonwealth on May 4th, you can RSVP right now at this link. And I'll be doing a 20-minute talk on what is Commonwealth and how can we make it come to Canada, where we can ask lots of questions there. And our next scheduled community call will be on June 22nd with Brent Rinaldi, who literally wrote the book called Commonwealth Dividends. And we're for Commonwealth Dividends, and we independently came up with this name because truth knows no boundaries, and it's kind of cool that there was actually a book called Commonwealth Dividends, even though we've been thinking about it since 2018. And this book is quite recent; it's from 2021. So that is, feel free to sign up for those right now if you're interested in these. But yeah, this call will be very minimal on overall Commonwealth and more about land. But I'm going to be talking a bit about Commonwealth in a moment. So as Chelsea mentioned, Q&A in these calls is great. Please go to slido.com, put in this code, or follow the link Chelsea put in the chat, and ask questions while I'm talking, while Martin's talking, because at the end, you can actually vote up questions. And at the end, we'll talk about it. So the call will officially end at 3 Eastern or at 12 Pacific, but we'll keep going as long as people want. At most another hour. Last time we had calls like this, people stayed a whole extra hour, like half the audience stayed just asking questions. So we're all quite passionate about these topics. So that's it. I'm going to do a really brief discussion now about what is Commonwealth for those who are new here. So what we advocate for a national investment fund, just a fund like any other that owns stocks and bonds that can pay people dividends as an ownership right, as well as a land value tax. The outcome of both of these would be dividends as a form of a property right that everyone has a share of part of the value of growing value of land, as well as from the stock portfolio. That could also be used to reduce or eliminate income taxes for 2/3 of Canadians, since land value tax would be how we contribute to government instead. And this would be very progressive, and we could go more into that at another time. But one of the reasons for this view is to create commonwealth, a form of wealth held in common in this time of extreme wealth inequality that gives everyone a bit of ownership income and can reduce the cost of living depending on how these things are taxed. Overall, we see that we are in a world right now where a lot of the value that is being created by the community, is coming from nature. It's not being created by nature or business, by individuals or business. So we can create a society that is actually in some ways more capitalist in that we are reducing taxes on work. So that said, I'm going to just talk a couple of minutes about these concepts. So cost of living is going up. We can all see it. It's going crazy. People are spending so much of their time and money just treading water. We're seeing rents and mortgage payments eclipse more than 50% of people's earned incomes, and it's just getting worse. And there's no end in sight. Meanwhile, we're also seeing wage growth stalled for many decades. We're in a situation where wage growth has been shown by researchers to be stagnant for many decades, and technology and technological automation is the prime reason, has been shown by researchers. 50 to 70% of the changes in wage structure has been driven by automation and technological job displacements. And as we know, with the onset of artificial intelligence, that's going to get a lot worse. So as a result, these two trends, rising cost of living, primarily housing, automation, reducing wage growth, you could say that we are currently in a ownership society. an ownership economy where those who own things are the ones who are benefiting and making money, and those who work are seeing increasingly diminishing share of their income going to their quality of life, and it's just going to get worse. So if we're in an ownership economy, then it kind of makes sense to create a bit of ownership for everyone. And how do we do that? Well, we do that by looking into what economists for hundreds of years has seen as something called economic rents, unearned income that is created from nature, created by the community, not created by the individual. And economic rents can be seen as a form of commonwealth that can pay money into this investment fund, that can pay people dividends, taking on monopolies, looking at what's driving the rising values of land, which is community created, and finding ways to reduce the cost of land and housing through a land value tax, the proceeds of which could go to pay everyone dividends, as well as reduce taxes for those with the least wealth. So the overall goal is that the why of Commonwealth is to find a way to share, to create more higher incomes for people connected to economic growth and reduce the cost of living. And the best way to reduce the cost of living is to take on the incentives that are driving up the cost of living. And we feel that a land value tax and various eco taxes can do that. So that's what Commonwealth is. If you want to hear more about this, I invite you to the next community call, where we'll go deeper onto Commonwealth specifically. And in the meantime, it's really a pleasure to invite Martin Adams to talk about land's impacts in our economy, and how we can turn this around, how we can create a lower cost of living, and improve and create a society we'd all be proud to be a part of. And at the end, we'll go into Q&A. Some of you are here from a basic income background and want to know, what is this Commonwealth thing versus basic income? It's definitely not in competition with, it's a complement to the idea of a guaranteed basic income. But we can talk about that later. And also very honored that there are a lot of experts here in the room with us today, many of which came before, helped to answer questions. But so we're really honored to have people here who can help us all along in our learning journey. So that said, Martin, feel free to share the screen and begin the talk.
Martin, I think you got muted somehow. Let me try to fix that.
There we go. I think I just fixed it. Hello, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen with you here. Just a sec. There. I hope everyone can see the slide. Well, welcome to this talk. Thank you for taking time out of your, no doubt, busy day to attend and participate. This is a very important topic, and I believe it affects all of us, homeowners, renters, and the unhoused alike, because the cost of living, as Floyd said, is incredibly high. I would like to start first by really extending my appreciation to Commonwealth Canada, and specifically to Floyd and his team for not only hosting this talk and other talks, but also for even having created Commonwealth Canada. Floyd put his own money into the organization and made it happen. And to me, that speaks a lot more than talk, when someone walks the walk. So that is something to be truly appreciated. I just can't speak highly enough of Floyd, and really appreciate the work he's doing. And the team as well, Ken, Chelsea, and all the other people who are working in the background really hard to make this happen. And while I'm here, I'd like to direct you to this very important link, commonwealth.ca/report. I will get back to it later on. They put a lot of work into this report, so I recommend you download the report. Before we start, I just wanted to do a brief land acknowledgement. Where I live in Vancouver, here on the East Coast in Canada. Vancouver is located on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. At first, when I heard my first land acknowledgement, I was like cynical, because I thought that people just say these things and they ignore the facts and then keep plundering the land anyway, right? But I came to realize that a land acknowledgement actually leads to an awareness, which can lead to reconciliation. Just by being aware that we are the ones, our society took land away from the First Nations and Native Americans. And in fact, those are the people that suffer the most today. And lastly, land acknowledgement is actually very relevant to this talk because we are seeking a new relationship to the land that we're occupying and to the people that we've taken it from. Very briefly about me, I'm the author of the book Land, A New Paradigm for a Thriving World, published by North Atlantic Books out of Berkeley, California, great publisher. You can buy my book online, local bookstore, or read it online. So there's a lot of material that I'm going to compress into a very short amount of time. So I'll be zipping through the slides. Don't worry if you don't catch something because it'll be recorded. You can revisit it at a later point in time. If you have any questions, please write them down and we can talk about these questions later on at the end. So why land? Why is it a big deal? Why is it important? What if I told you that from now on, you had to pay other people each month for the air you breathe, right? Like if you actually had to pay money from your bank account to someone else so that you could get your allotted amount of air. That sounds ludicrous, right? But that's the situation we're in today. People have to pay for the location we inhabit, usually to a bank through a mortgage or a landlord through a rent check. And it's not much different from the air, from paying someone else for the air we breathe. Most of that mortgage check or rent check is actually location value. So the building, especially here in Vancouver, like in a large city, is usually very small compared to the privilege of being in a certain location like Vancouver, which is where the jobs are too, right? Makes up about 80% of the location value. So what's the issue? I mean, it's been this way forever, right? Why is this a problem? And I'd like to direct you to the next slide, which is, to me, when I saw this, my jaw dropped. It's this. This shows the percentage change in the income versus the rents. And by rents, I mean all sorts of rents. Rents we pay to the landlord, but also the cumulative rents we pay in form of mortgages, right? Because of increasing land value prices. And what you see is that the median rent price is on the top and the blue income is on the bottom. And you can see that from 1985 to 2020, rents have increased 4 times over incomes, 4 times. And again, it's not just housing prices, but rents. So if you can't afford to buy a house, you still have to pay rent. Meanwhile, you are being priced out. And it's a fact of our economic system that rents always increase faster than wages over the long run, unless we do something about it. People are literally being priced out into poverty. So when your grandparents or your parents say, well, back then we could afford, a single family home, you just got to work harder, don't believe them. They couldn't do what they did back then today because the situation is different. We are paying a lot more in rent and incomes have stagnated, as Floyd said earlier in the introduction. How do we fix it? Again, check out the report. It creates an amazing opportunity. But I'm here not to talk so much about the technical implementation. My talk is about why the solution to this problem is harder than you think. At the heart of this issue is our collective relationship to property, to land. We view it not as an investment, not as a commons, and that's really the heart of the matter. So there's a conflict between 2 desires in society. And when I say the word desire, I don't mean what people say they want, but I look at what people actually do that shows a deeper desire. So here in Canada, in the States too, and I think in most industrialized nations, there is a strong desire for higher property prices. And we see that desire expressed in various ways. For example, economic growth leads to higher property prices. Population growth, like immigration and general population growth, also leads to higher property prices. And public sector investments also lead to higher property prices. And we see that the government invests in all 3. We want economic growth because it does serve us. We want population growth and we want public sector investments. But the issue is all 3 actions lead to higher property prices. And let's not forget that 66.5% of Canadians are homeowners. And it stands to reason that a good percentage of those people would like to see their property prices increase. And lastly, let's remember that in a way, the foundation of our current civilization is the sense of private land ownership. And by the word private land ownership, I don't mean just the ability to use land privately, but to extract money from land ownership, right? We have this assumption that land is something that we can profit from, that we should be able to flip and make money from, buy low, sell high, right? That really is the foundation of our current civilization in some ways. And that shows that there is a very, very strong desire for that people have to make money from land. And this desire is in direct conflict with this other desire, this desire for affordable housing, right? Ask the person on the street, do you want affordable housing? Chances are they will say yes, of course. Who doesn't want to have affordable housing, right? There are so many public programs and initiatives out there for public housing, CMHC here in Canada, National Housing Strategy, BC Housing in British Columbia, where I live. And there's a lot of money that the government spends to create affordable housing. The Government of Canada website, there's a whole page dedicated to affordable housing, and I think they're spending $1.9 billion on affordable housing with this latest initiative. And let's remember that 33.5% of Canadians are not homeowners, and there's a good chance that those people want affordable housing as well, right? So there are these two conflicts. One, I just want to share about this conflict. On the one hand, we want to see property prices increase, and on the other hand, we want to see property prices decrease so that they can become more affordable. So here's the question. Can you simultaneously make property prices increase and decrease at the same time? Because that's really what people want as a whole, as our society collectively speaking. We want property prices to increase and decrease at the same time. No, you cannot. Let me repeat that question again, because we are so focused on having both desires met at the same time. We want property prices to increase, but we also want affordable housing, right? But can you make property prices increase and decrease at the same time? You cannot. That's just the fact. In any economic system, you can fulfill one desire, property price appreciation, or the other desire, property price depreciation, but not both. If you're gunning for both, you get the mess we are in today, a schizophrenic attempt to getting both desires met at the same time. And as a result, you can't really meet either need. I'd like to talk briefly about land value taxes, because land value taxes are a clear decision towards property price depreciation. The effect of land value taxes will be that they will cause property prices to decrease. And that's a really good thing, because in the end, just to be clear, if we had to choose between property price appreciation and property price depreciation or decreases, we should always choose lower property prices. It's not healthy for us as a society to profit from land, from real estate, beyond what people work. The more money we spend on rent, the less money we have left over to pay for goods and services. Like what Floyd said, the less, if we have land value taxes, we have a more capitalistic, in a healthy way, a more capitalistic economy where we can have more goods and services, employment will increase, and wages will go up significantly. So land value taxes are a good thing, but there's a catch. Remember desire number one, higher property prices. If you implement a land value tax today, you're gonna, without any other remediation measures, you're gonna run into some serious issues. And I will tell you what those issues are by way of an example. I just plucked this condo from realtor.ca, a real estate website, and cost $540,000 here in Vancouver. Let's just make some assumptions. Let's say that this that we're going to levy a land value tax of 3% on the property, 3%, not too much. And let's just assume that the homeowner has an 80% mortgage on the property, which is common. So $432,000. if we apply a 3% land value tax, we're going to get a 33% decrease in the total property value. It'll be decreased to $360,000. Don't worry about the math. You can take a look at it later on if you like. So the issue is, before you had a property worth $540,000, after the land value tax, you have a property worth $360,000 and have a net decrease of $180,000, which is a good thing because now properties are more affordable again, right? Except for current existing property owners. They would actually incur, not only will the property be underwater by $72,000, because the mortgage itself, the mortgage that the person owes, didn't get decreased, just the property value got decreased, right? So the house would be underwater by $72,000, and the property owner had a net loss or a decrease in equity by $180,000. So that's not good news for property owners, right? And that is the catch with a pure land value tax without any other remediative efforts. And so when people talk about solutions to this unaffordability issues, they talk about land value taxes, tax reform, even basic income and rent capture. But oftentimes people don't talk about the issue that is underneath it or at the center of it, which is the issue that people don't want property prices to decrease. That's kind of at the core of it. So when there's pushback, usually people are saying, yeah, but. I know it makes sense rationally, but I don't want my property price to decrease in value, right? And that is what people are, I think, most concerned about. And yet we have to find a way to make property affordable again. So how do we do this? It's been done before. This is not the first time that a human society has been at this intersection where property has become unaffordable and we don't know how to move forward. It's been done before. So there are three solutions. One is a basic income plus a reduction or an elimination of income taxes coupled with a land value tax, right? And that's currently what we see in the report at Commonwealth Canada. Another approach is no land value tax, but a gradual transition to community land trusts. And I will talk a bit about that very briefly. And then another approach, a third approach, is where land value bonds are issued to property owners, coupled with a reduction and elimination in income taxes, plus the land value tax, and possibly also basic income. And I will explain each of these. So the first one, I can explain it as well as Floyd and Commonwealth can. I definitely recommend the report. So check out the report. The second is a community land trust. It's a very gradual and slow and tedious process, but it's voluntary, but it requires a lot of cash to acquire land. And I'm sure you know Bernie Sanders, right? He used to be the mayor of Burlington in Vermont in the 80s, and he created the first municipal community land trust. Today, this community land trust owns over 7% of the housing stock of Burlington, Vermont. 7%, that's incredible. So if you're a mayor, or if you are an urban planner with a budget, my recommendation is create a housing trust. Buy up as much land as you can and sell the buildings back into the market, back to developers, but always keep the land. The second approach is a land value bond, where you have a reduction and elimination in income taxes, plus the land value tax. Fred Foldberry, an economist that I've greatly admired, he passed 2 years ago. He spoke about it in his essays, and he mentioned that many advocates for land value taxation have proposed that the government buy the land or compensate title holders in some way. If the compensation can facilitate and speed up a prosperity tax shift, let's do it. And next, I'm going to talk about an example, a real life example where this has been done before. Taiwan. In 1949, Chiang Kai-shek arrived in Taiwan after losing the civil war in China, right? So him and his people retreated to the island of Taiwan. And at the time, it was mostly owned by wealthy families. Rents were super high and poverty was widespread. People were poor, they had to pay a lot of rent to landlords. And he was like, look, we can't keep doing this. So he created a Land to Tiller Act in 1949, which was carried out in 1953. And he created a Taiwan land bank, which reimbursed property owners with interest-bearing land bonds and compensation for this gradual transition towards land value taxes. He then resold the land back to the market, but with a land value tax attached to it. And because Taiwan did this, today, Taiwan is an economic powerhouse. If you look at statistics, high population density, but low rent, right? Usually when you get a high population density, you get high rent. But that's not the case in Taiwan. You also have high population density and a flurry of economic activity. Taiwan exports like crazy. They're very powerful. And I just imagine if Canada was like that, I mean, the world would be a massively better place for the United States. So I want to bring you back to this chart. Remember this, rents being super high and income being low compared to rents. And the direction that we're heading into today is not a good direction. If this keeps going, and I guess it will, we're going to see increased social strife in our society, more so than we have today. I don't care if a country calls itself a democracy. What ends up happening is if a government doesn't take care of its own people economically, there will be increased social strife, and people will not trust the democratic institutions, because on some level we experience that those democratic institutions are not looking after our own well-being in some way, and that is currently the situation we have. So I just want to bring your attention back to this chart, and I sure hope that governments are seeing this chart and paying attention, because there is now a time for tax reform, significant tax reform. Otherwise, we'll just keep heading down in this direction. And I think I want to close with a measure of compassion, especially young people, Gen Z, are struggling. There's a lot of unaffordability. And maybe we having this deeper understanding of what's actually happening in our current economy, maybe we can have a measure of compassion for people who can't afford housing or who are struggling financially, and realize that, you know, this is not all their fault. This is our collective responsibility. And I think with that, I want to turn it over to Floyd.
Okay, so Martin Adams and I, we're going to do a quick Q&A for a few minutes, like a fireside chat, and then we're going to go over to the Slido. So everyone, please add your questions to the Slido, and then I think Chelsea will facilitate the Slido questions. So Martin, you thought about this for a long time, and the book is exceptional. You told me a few weeks ago that this movement really needs an emotional resonance, because people have been advocating for land value tax for hundreds of years, and economists are unanimous that land value tax is good. Like, they find one economist who says that's not the best tax we should have. I don't think it's not. It's difficult. So, you know, you talked about ending with a measure of compassion. Like, what do you think that is? Like, what do you think that emotional resonance is? I mean, I've been thinking about it, and I think we're literally talking about a generational divide, like almost like a New Deal. Like, what's best for future generations, for young families, and coming at a sacrifice that we all have to give up, which is this incentive to profit off land. Maybe you want to share a bit of your thoughts around that.
I think at the heart of the resistance to land value taxes is a measure of fear. And I don't mean it in a bad way. It's more like, hey, if the land value tax gets introduced, I won't be able to afford my mortgage anymore. I'll be underwater, for example, right? So people will need to feel that whatever change comes their way will fully take care of them. They need to be able to trust it, right? This sense of trust. When people don't have trust in a policy shift, that policy shift, I don't believe will stand a chance. So there has to be a measure of trust, and trust can be built once people understand and realize in their hearts that they are safe, and that this would benefit not just them, but everyone, and them, especially themselves in the long run, if that makes sense. And that is the feeling component that I spoke to, a sense of safety, that makes sense, and compassion.
And have you had experience talking to politicians about this reform? Like, what you usually experience when you do that?
About who? To whom?
To politicians or candidates about these reforms. What do you usually hear?
So the issue with candidates is that they are on a 4-year schedule, usually 3 or 4 year schedule, right? And they don't want to rock the boat. And I don't, let's see, it's been a while since I've spoken to a politician. I have spoken with one person in South Africa, and they were implementing land reform. And I think when you're dealing with land reform, things can get dicey because our society, in a way, doesn't want change, but it needs change. And that's really the issue. And frankly, I don't know how to overcome it. I don't know how to overcome this burden that politicians have, which is they're here on a limited time, and they have to please the voters. And I think, therefore, it has to start with a ground movement, kind of like, and I think that's what you're doing, which is so important. Before you can talk to politicians, you have to talk to the people, and you have to get the people behind this. And when you get the people behind it, the politicians will follow suit. That's usually how it works.
Yeah, that is our approach, and we're at the beginnings of it. Everyone here on this call are the early adopters. I was reading a Reddit post last week about a gentleman saying that he wants to buy a home, but he knows it'll cost 50% of their disposable income to buy a home, and his wife wants to have children, and he wants to delay until they have more financial security, and they're already in their mid-30s. And this is the reality we're facing, where like literally our humanity is being sapped, our ability to have families, to prosper, because of high housing prices. And I guess I'm curious, like, when you're speaking to younger people who are confronted with this despair about, will they ever own a home? Like, how has these ideas resonated for them? And what do you usually say to young people about this?
Usually when I explain what the issue is, like you see a light bulb go off and they're like, oh yeah, of course, right? But then also there's a despair sometimes of, well, it's not going to change, right? There's this sense of overwhelm where people understand the issue, or they have this light bulb moment, but then they don't know how this could possibly be different and change. And so I've had people be very excited about the idea, but then kind of move on because they just didn't know what to do about it. And I think that's why it's so important, the leadership that you're taking, that you give people a call to action. And I give them the idea, and then I can now say, go here, go to commonwealth.ca, follow this, take action right here. I think that I haven't had before, and I think that caused a measure of despair. People didn't know what to do.
Well, that's a lot of pressure on us.
No.
Yeah, so I guess we'll.
I think you need both idea and action.
Yeah, and if you fundamentally, and land value tax could be done incrementally. A lot of cities have done a shift from property tax to land value tax, but I'm really interested in the new generation actually knowing what is a solution to their pain. And I think that really requires confronting, frankly, as you did in your talk, the raw numbers, that if we do implement even over a 20-year period, if we introduce land value tax slowly, that confronts the full rental value of land. Many economists have predicted that the market would respond within the first 2 years to reduce the price of land to a maximum amount, to even up to 70% less.
Floyd and Martin, can I just jump in for 1 second here? I was wondering, Adam or Martin, do you know there's another way of introducing LVT, and that's one person at a time. You don't have to do all or nothing. It's called a land value covenant. And the British Georgists have developed this idea. There's a website on it. I'll find it and post it. That means if you personally want to switch to land value taxation instead of income taxes, you can do that, but your neighbors don't have to. And then you sign a covenant with the municipality, and from then on, your property is forever under LVT, but it doesn't affect the neighbors. This is a really brilliant strategy.
Yeah, I'm very grateful that you mentioned that. This is the fourth approach, and I actually mentioned it in my book. And I didn't mention it today, but really thank you for doing that.
And okay, and those of you who are interested, maybe contact me later. I'm interested to explore if there's a way to do a virtual land trust that could basically do that, but do it through private sector incentives and create the system from the bottom up. Anyway, but that's way too technical. So let's go on to the questions. And we have 20 minutes for the official end, but then we'll stay as long as there's questions, because there's a lot of passionate people here. There are a lot of super experts who have joined us as well, who can answer. You're welcome to answer questions as well. You just heard from Frank. He was the former leader of the Ontario Green Party, and his work inspired our work on our report. So just once again, before we go to Q&A, because that'll be kind of the official end of the part of the call where we're talking about some of our logistics. They will be two more calls. There are two more calls scheduled right now. And I'm just going to quickly share the screen again. One moment. So the next call, which will be with me going deeper onto what is Commonwealth. Many of you have already been to that call, so don't come back unless you just want to be there for the Q&A part. That's on May 4th. And on June 22nd, we have Brent Rinaldi of Commonwealth Dividends. So if you want to hear about more than just land, come to that one, because he talks about all forms of Commonwealth, including the financial sector, air, water. We're working on a series of guest speakers to look at all aspects of what Commonwealth is and how we could implement it primarily in Canada,